Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill began life about 7 years ago. In fact, I have testified on this bill before I ever became a member of this body. This involves site-based councils, which were formed as part of CARA back in 1990. Basically, site-based councils had a very well-intended meaning, and that was they wanted to return decision-making to the ultimate local level, which was the site, the school, site-based schools, and it wanted to give parents input, so they created a body composed of 3 teachers, 2 parents, and the principal. That process has evolved over those years, and there has been a lot of dispute about 2 primary areas of Senate Bill 1. The first is the hiring of a principal and who should have that role as far as it goes in the school district. The second is the curriculum. Now, initially, when the matter came before this body and it was passed and became law, there were challenges to that, as would be expected. In fact, in my school district, Boone County, we were the first district to be sued in Boucher versus Boone County Board of Education for, quote, usurping the authority of a site-based council. But the problem began in that superintendents were being held accountable for principals that they really didn't have a hand in hiring. That has evolved over time, but has still been somewhat problematic. So what this bill does, the primary portion of the bill, is that the bill allows the principal to be hired by the superintendent after consultation with the site-based council and the principal, but the ultimate hiring authority would go to the superintendent. What this bill also does is to restore to the Board of Education, along with the superintendent, the ability to select curriculum for the district. It would be basically selected or recommended by the superintendent for board approval. And what happens in many school districts, and mine is a great example because you often have multiple elementary schools feeding into a middle school, and then you'll have middle schools feeding into a high school. And so if different schools adopt a different curriculum, that can create a problem because as students arrive in the middle school level, they're not aligned. They've come through different curriculums. Plus, if you have a transient student population and you have a student moving from a school to other schools, they're in the change of the curriculum process. And so it's created some conflicts. It's also created some administrative conflicts in that directives of the site-based councils sometimes are at conflict with directives given to the superintendent by the Kentucky Department of Education, and that has resulted in hearings from the Office of Educational Accountability. And that has created some problems. So the intent of this bill that has been brought by Senator Schickel is to solve those core problems. However, in light of that, there have been several pieces that have been brought to the attention of the sponsor and to my attention, and as a result, we have a rather large House Committee substitute. So with that, I would ask the clerk to report House Committee Substitute 1.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Committee Substitute 1 to Senate Bill 1.
Gentleman from Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 3 large components that are rolled into one committee substitute that we discussed actually in committee today. The first one is a request with regards to Jefferson County, which had done some things differently, had gotten some approval to do some things differently. They have the largest board in the state of Kentucky. There was at times a power struggle that existed between the board and the superintendent and how the day-to-day operations would be able to run. So this language was brought to us and asked to be added into this as a House Committee sub to allow them to continue to do what we believe is good work in Jefferson County and trying to deal with that particular issue. The second part of the bill that is in there is a piece related to House or Senate Bill 138. And if you were in the committee meeting today, you know that not only did we hear 138 standing alone, but we also heard it as a committee sub in the House Committee Sub 1 to Senate Bill 1. And there are a variety of strategic reasons for doing that, but the language of Senate Bill 138, which was Senator Wise's bill, in order to try to deal with some of the CRT issues that came through, that language was incorporated into this House Committee Sub, and it was debated today, and I know there are people for and against on both sides. I know there's been a lot of discussion in this chamber among members, among the different chambers, about the CRT issue, dealing with the public boards, dealing with very difficult board meetings, not only due to CRT, but also to COVID. And so the idea of 138 was to try to bring some recourse to that particular issue with regards to some of the documentation that's used in teaching the historical aspects of our country, of our state, of our nation. So that's the second piece. The third piece that's rolled in there is a fix for some COVID days where there were some teachers afforded some relief under the COVID Act. Some weren't, depending on if they were in quarantine or if they had actually tested positive. And this part of the bill is just a simple fix to bring equality to those teachers that may have been affected by that particular scenario. Now, I know there's going to be questions on several of these matters, and I believe that one of my colleagues, at least, is going to call a floor amendment that will be, I believe, a friendly amendment. But at this point, I would move for the adoption of House Committee Sub 1.
Motion made for the adoption of House Committee Substitute 1. Is there any debate or discussion? Gentleman from Boyle, do you wish to speak on a committee sub or the bill?
On the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Jefferson 37, the committee sub or the bill? On the bill. Question for the body is on adoption of House Committee Substitute 1. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. House Committee Substitute 1 is adopted. Gentleman from Boone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, in large part, this bill has grown. It has been magnified. And in the perfect world, I think all of us might have rather had Senate Bill 1 in its purest form and then deal with each of these other bills one at a time so we could weigh in accordingly. But in the waning hours of any session that I've learned in my short time here, things obviously get saddled together oftentimes to try to get different matters heard before the body. And I think that is exactly what has happened here. We are short on time. We believe that Senate Bill 1 certainly is something that I personally have believed has been needed for several years, and in fact I've testified on it in 2 prior sessions. Again, this is not meant to take parents out of the involvement. As an educator myself for approximately 30 years, having taught my way through law school, having served as a school board member, and in a national office, I will tell you that good schools have parental involvement. And in parental engagement is pivotal into having a good outcome in a school, which is why in many cases it's become more and more difficult in public schools, because with the decline of the family, with many more single-parent homes, etc., the children just don't have the resources that they had at one time. When I first became a board member, we used to basically teach them, but now we feed them before school, we feed them during school, we feed them after school, we do before-school programs, we do after-school programs, we do family counseling, we do speech pathology, and somewhere in the midst of that, we have to deliver an educational curriculum. So the challenge has become greater. And we want parental involvement, so I don't want this body to think that Senate Bill 1 is an attack on that parental involvement. It's not. But remember this, the school board members are duly elected officials, just like we are. They answer to their constituent body, and their job is to be the liaison between the communities that they serve and with the district that has to carry on the day-to-day operations. Some of those are very functional, and candidly, some are very dysfunctional. But if a school board does not uphold its capacity as a school board, then certainly they face the re-election challenges that we may face when we're held accountable for our actions. So with that being said, we have entrusted, through the special session we had last year, we entrusted school boards with some decisions that we felt like would be better held at the local level. This is really not meant to take away anything from parents. It's basically to put a process in place where curriculums can be aligned, where principals can be selected and there's a line of accountability. School boards, as you may know, are not supposed to have anything to do with personnel, which means their job, basically, is to set policy for the district and to hire the superintendent. The superintendent, on the other hand, is responsible for the performance of those schools, including the operations of the day-to-day functions, as well as dealing with those individual principals, and it's very difficult for them to do so if they are only partially involved in the hiring process. In fact, some of you that have not been around education very long may not remember that back in the day, actually school councils could hire principals, but they could not fire them. Only the superintendent could fire them, and in fact, then the council could go back and hire the principal. That was fixed. Again, I told you earlier that that had evolved. This simply puts it back in alignment where it should be. Again, we think that the councils, over the time that it's served since 1990, has benefited our school districts. We think Kentucky's raised its stakes in the education game, but we think it's time for that change now. And that's why we're asking for the core bill, which is the Senate Bill 1, the House Committee substitute. As I've already indicated, I'm going to ask some of my colleagues to speak with respect to the particular aspects of that, and certainly we'll have questions. But before we get into those questions, I would like to defer to the gentleman from Jefferson, I believe it's 33, with regards to one of those matters.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Jefferson, 33.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the clerk to call. I guess I need to ask for the rules to be suspended so the clerk can call House Floor Amendment 7.
Motion made that the rules be suspended for the purpose of considering House Floor Amendment 7. Motion is not debatable. Takes a 51-member vote, constitutional majority. And Mr. Clerk, sound the chimes. The roll call machine is now open for your voting. Those in favor of suspension of the rules will vote yea. Those opposed, vote nay. Have all members voted? Clerk will take the roll. There being 75 members voting yea, the rules are suspended for consideration of House Floor Amendment 7. Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the clerk to call House Floor Amendment 7.
Mr. Clerk, please report.
House Floor Amendment 7 to Senate Bill 1.
Gentleman from Jefferson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the main reasons that Senate Bill 1 has been introduced and has passed the Senate and is here today is to enable the superintendent to have more hiring authority with respect to the hiring principals. You guys, everyone in the chamber may remember a few years ago, I think 4 years ago, there was a bill that enabled or empowered the Jefferson County JCPS superintendent to do that. Only the JCPS superintendent, and now everyone else is doing the same thing. In that time, JCPS and their site-based decision-making groups have reached agreements whereby the SBDMs will make recommendations to the superintendent, and that's working well. The superintendent doesn't have to take those recommendations. So this would just preserve the agreement that they have that's been working in Jefferson County for 4 years. That's the first thing of 3 that it has done. That was Floor Amendment 1. But obviously there's a committee substitute, which is the reason that this was filed today. The second thing that it does of 2 things is that in one of the provisions that was put onto the committee sub today, it said that the school board can only meet 1 out of every 8 weeks. This is an amendment that would make it 1 out of every, it can meet every 4 weeks. That's on page 32, line 4. And it also would take a unanimous vote to overturn any policy that the superintendent has made. That seems a little bit too far. And so what this does on page 33, line 9, is it takes 2/3 to overturn a policy that the superintendent has come up with. So with that, I ask for adoption of House Floor Amendment 7.
I do have an amendment. I do have a floor amendment, Mr. Speaker, but the rules would have to be suspended in order for me to offer that. So I would move at this point to suspend the rules in order to offer a floor amendment.
Motion made for the suspension of the rules. Which floor amendment is that, gentlemen?
It is floor amendment number 6.
Motion made to suspend the rules for consideration of House Floor Amendment 6. Again, the motion is not debatable. It requires a constitutional majority. We will now proceed to vote. Mr. Clerk, sound the chimes. Those in favor of suspending the rules will vote yes, yea on a roll call machine. Those opposed, nay. And a roll call machine is open for your voting. Have all members voted? Clerk will take the roll. There being 53 members voting yea, the rules are suspended for considering House Floor Amendment 6. Gentleman from Boyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Floor amendment number 6 does two simple things. It says that a site-based decision-making council election may occur over multiple days and via electronic means. At the moment, these elections are held at very specific times on specific days, and the participation rates are not as high as they should be. And so I'm hopeful that this would allow more parents to participate in the process. And it also, on page 4, line 21, when the superintendent is determining the curriculum, textbooks, instructional materials, and student support services, the superintendent would consult with the school principal and the school council under this bill. My amendment would also add consultation with the local board of education prior to making determinations about curriculum, textbooks, instructional materials, and student support services. And so I would move adoption, Mr. Speaker, and thank the gentleman from Boone for yielding.
And with regards to that, I will tell you, having been in this role for a long time, it's, some councils run very effectively and they schedule their elections, they go very smooth. Some, I've been at PTA meetings where they've had to beg people to come and try to serve on the council as parent members, et cetera. So I think this is just another opportunity to give people more parental engagement, and for that reason I would consider it a friendly floor amendment. With that, Mr. Speaker, certainly there's going to be questions, but I would move for the adoption of Senate Bill 1 as amended by House Committee Substitute 1, House Floor Amendment 6, and House Floor Amendment 7.